Hey guys, welcome back. This is session number 7 of our NLP Practitioner Intro series. And in this session, we'll be talking about turning negatives into positives. Looking at the context reframing, meaning reframe, using reframing in life, and our 6-step reframe. So changing the meaning or the context many times will change the behavior. More tools for the toolbox, so let's get right into it. Now I want you to think of a scene. Imagine coming out of the grocery store and you see a man and a woman standing outside of their car, or you're not sure if it's their car or not. And the woman is definitely mad. She's yelling at the man. You can't quite make out what she's saying, but she's looks frustrated, mad, and yelling at him. Now, what do you think that means? Think about it. According to your filters in your mind, you're perceiving a situation here. And more likely than not, you're going to reference old scenarios or old files in your mind and compare what's going on in this current scene. Now, I have different filters. So I might see a husband and wife arguing. You may see a fight about to happen because a man backed his car into another woman's car. We really don't know. And that's just it. Our perception of a situation can be completely different than the next person's perception of the same situation. Or we can reframe it in our own mind and perceive a whole different meaning of the situation as well. That's the power of reframing. Let's look at the manual under reframing. We do have another example with some photos in our book. Let's get right into it. See, we live in a subjective reality. The things and events in the world around us have no meaning themselves. Things have meaning because we attach meaning to them from those previous filters. We can change the meaning of nearly anything at the unconscious level using reframing. And the purpose of it is to separate the intention from the behavior. Many times we create behavior initially as a protective mechanism with the highest intention. And that might be the first scenario or context that we have to produce that behavior. And that's the first program that was installed. So later, we may have a similar situation come up in life that requires a similar behavior output, and we reference the first program. The first time, that was a really high intention to create that behavior. It may be completely out of context now in this current situation. We don't know that on the unconscious level, so we run the previous program. Look at these photos in the book. We have 3 different photos at the top. You see a man running. A man looks like he pushed a woman down, and then he's running away. So in the first group of pictures, we see what looks like a brute terrorizing a young lady. But if we pan out and see the whole picture, you can see there's 3 other photos there in the second group. He was actually a hero. You see a pile of cinder blocks falling off a roof, and if he wouldn't have pushed her out of the way, she may have been crushed. So a whole different context. We changed the frame size. We got a new meaning. Now in our practitioner level training, we're going to go over 2 major reframes. In Master Prac, we've got about 20 more, some quantum linguistic, sleight of mouth patterns, really powerful, eloquent techniques. Right now, we're going to start working with 2 of them. So we'll learn 2 different types. There's the context reframe and meaning reframe. So in context, we can change the context of the current behavior and many times see that the behavior is perfectly acceptable in a whole different context. Similar like the story I told you before, where the original behavior output was a very high intention or protection purpose, but a later scenario may trigger the same pattern, whole different context, so the behavior might not be appropriate in the current context. It was perfectly appropriate in the first context. That's context reframing. And again, by doing the reframing, we're trying to separate that intention from behavior. And by doing so, many times we can just cause those obstacles and problems and objections to simply melt away in the person's mind or your own mind. Now let's go ahead and look at the context reframe. This tends to work best with comparative deletions or complex equivalences. Example may be, I'm too broke, or he's too stubborn. Reframe. Think of a different context in which the person will respond differently to the same behavior. A different context in time, a different time in their life, a different physical location, a different situation. Examples may be, she's too headstrong. And a reframe may sound like this. Isn't it great that she'll be able to stand up for herself? Or another, I don't have enough money to go to master practitioner training. So a reframe might sound like, if your car broke down, wouldn't you do anything to fix it? Now, what's more important to invest in, your car or transforming your life? And you can see all we did was take the same behavior and put it in a different scenario or different context. And the meaning changed. And then we have the meaning reframe. This tends to work best with cause and effect statements and complex equivalences also. Examples like, whenever X happens, I respond with Y. That would be a cause and effect. Or since I X, I Y. Or X because Y. You see, that kind of sounds like something's equal to another too, so complex equivalence could fit in there as well. A reframe. Ask yourself, what else could this behavior mean? Or internally think of an opposite frame or a different meaning. So think to yourself, what is it that this person hasn't noticed that will bring about a different meaning and change his response? Another meaning for the same behavior. So examples. When I meet potential clients, I feel nervous. A reframe may sound like, energy is just energy. Couldn't all that energy just be excitement? Because we know that anxiety and enthusiasm and excitement have the same physical feelings about them. I'm confused, and that makes me feel like I don't understand this information. But feeling confused, that means you know something. For example, I know nothing about building a house, and I can't feel confused about it. Because you're confused, you're learning. And confusion always precedes a higher level of understanding. So here we've actually changed the meaning of the behavior. And in turn, given a whole different meaning of the statement. So now when you're working with people, we're listening for these things in their language and that structure of the language. Not so much of all the content anymore. We're starting to look at the structure of how they do the problem in their head. And the meanings and the contents fit within that, true. But if we can think through the words or through the lines in their speech and then start to reframe the language for them, they start to loosen their hold on their problem so much and get other choice. We're trying to instill more choice. Remember, the subconscious likes that more efficient choice. So the more choices with more efficiency we can give them, more likely change happens. And this was truly the beginnings of NLP, as Bandler was assisting Virginia Satir and recording her sessions and transcribing them. He started to notice all these different reframe patterns she would use on everybody. Simple techniques like this get powerful, quick change to help people understand their thinking process and add choices to that thinking process to think of different scenarios, context, or meanings for their same behavior output, which in turn changes the behavior as they start to see other choices, or hear other choices, or feel other choices. But how could we use it in daily life? I like to revert back to our model of communication and the filters in the brain and our list of presuppositions of NLP. One that really stands out for me is that law of requisite variety. That means the person or place with the most flexibility always controls the situation or the system. So all of this NLP knowledge is instilling more and more flexibility into our communication and our perception. If we can remain flexible, there's always another context and always another meaning because there's other filters out there. And we can either rearrange our own filters, clean them up, or whatever we need to do to create that flexible behavior. Like watching the couple fight in the parking lot. Was that a couple? Were they strangers? Who knows? The more choices I have, the more likely I'm going to find the solution. So reframing any of your current problems or issues, or helping others reframe theirs, get flexible. Remain flexible. Look for more and more choices. And by doing so, you'll see that your perception of your problem just simply melts away, or you become enlightened by actually finding out that the solution was right there within the context of the problem in the first place. You just had to change the meaning. Or it was in the meaning, the context was fine, and you just had to change how you were thinking about your behavior in the first place. And here in our manual, we do have another technique here, the 6-step reframe. It's rarely used. It's been largely replaced by parts integration, which we'll learn in the next coming tracks. The biggest reason for it being not used as much is because it actually has the possibility of installing parts. It doesn't eliminate parts, rather gives them a new purpose and reframes their current purpose, and has the potential to even install more parts. We're trying to go for wholeness in our current model of NLP. So it's put in the manual for historical purposes, and it's still valid. You can still use it. We just find that parts integration seems to reintegrate things a little more holistically. So we still get the same behavior change and highest intention awareness without running the possibility of installing even more parts and fragments in our nervous system. So go ahead and look in your manual at that 6-step reframing, and we'll go through that because, like I said, it's still valid, and even pieces of this I've used in different situations. So we do need to pre-frame it, meaning explain that to our clients. We're going to have to show them some signals, some images, sounds, and sensations that they may be using. Those are the kind of communication we're setting up. Reframing can be used with any behavior, internal or external, or any symptom. So number 1, identify the problem behavior that the client wants more choices about. Number 2, ask the part in charge of that behavior if it's willing to communicate. This is when we're actually talking to a little fragment of our personality, like it has its own personality. So we get a yes or no signal. Good. What image, sound, word, sensation was the client aware of when they asked that question? Are you willing to come out and communicate? Ask the part to increase that image, sound, or sensation if the answer is yes, or decrease it if it's no. If yes, thank the part and go on. If no, thank the part for communicating and reassure the part that it is entirely understandable that it does not want to communicate on a conscious level. Reassure the part that it is in charge of the behavior or behavior X, and in no way are you trying to get rid of it, nor would you allow the client to attempt to do so. We're only trying to get some information and alignment. So reassuring that they're doing fine. It's utilization. Number 3, ask the part, what's the purpose or its function? Or what's its positive intention? The part can answer consciously or unconsciously, but the client must accept that the part does have some positive intention. To help the person elicit this, ask them to imagine what it might be. A purpose here is to separate the behavior from the intention again, or the function, and to get the client's conscious mind to begin to appreciate that a part is a friend or a teacher. Thank the part for its positive intention and make sure the client begins to sincerely appreciate the part as well. Number 4, ask the client to go to the creative unconscious part and ask that it generate at least 3 alternatives to the negative behavior that would satisfy the same intention, accomplish the purpose of that behavior. Or you can also have the part responsible for the behavior go to the creative part directly to inform that part what its purpose is. That is useful, especially when purpose remains unconscious. These new choices can be on a conscious level. We ask the creative part to give the client a signal when it has generated these new alternatives and thank the creative part. This is pretty cool. This is when we really start to understand that our unconscious mind, being out of our awareness most of the day, still has a lot of jobs to do. And we could tell it even more jobs to do, and we don't always have to be consciously aware that we told it the job and it's going to do it for us. It follows perfect orders. So trust your body, trust your unconscious mind to take those orders and play them out for us. Now, number 5. Ask the part responsible for the problem behavior whether it's willing to use these alternative choices instead of the behavior. A yes or no signal. If yes, thank the part and go on. If no, put a time limit on the request. Like, will you be willing to use these alternative choices for at least 2 weeks and try them out to find out if they're effective and available? If no, ask the part to go back to the creative part and help generate alternatives that it would be willing to try out for at least that limited period of time, and then thank the part. Number 6, check ecology. Ask the client, check with all their parts to make sure all are comfortable and accept the entire process and the alternatives. If yes, thank the parts. If no, check on how the client knows this, how this represents an objection. Then ask the image, sound, or sensation and increase it if needed. Reassure the client any objection is important information and is welcome. If there's an objection, go back to step 3 and go through the process with the parts that object, making sure that the objecting part and the part that runs the first behavior agree on all the alternatives and work together. Treat parts of a person as though they were all parts of a negotiating team. It's important that each member's function and purpose be respected and paid attention to, ultimately still leading to that highest intention of the whole group. Cycle back through the process until you get full acceptance by any alternative behaviors from all parts involved. And then we thank all the parts. And note there at the bottom, the main purpose of the 6-step reframe is to set up bridges or channels of communication between the client's unconscious and conscious mind, even between parts of the person's unconscious, and to install in the person a belief that all parts are allies or potential teachers and friends. And then we can let them out into the world with new choices for the same behavior or new behavior for the same context. So that's the 6-step reframe, again, been largely replaced by the parts integration, where we actually take those parts and reintegrate them back to the highest purpose and thank them for the new behaviors while creating wholeness in the same. Now on the next page, we'll see that meta model 3. This is a little example of some quantum linguistics, really heavy in some NLP language here, where we tend to associate to the problem, dissociate, blow out the boundaries of the problem, and then link to resources in the now and into the future. This is a conversational change example, or detailed questioning for a resolution. To start, we see that little angle there with the problem side and the solution side right there at the flip in the middle. We start and then we reconfirm at the end. So we have a person there with a problem, and we ask, what's wrong? So they associate to themselves to find out what's wrong. What caused this problem? we begin to dissociate, to look from the outside back in, what caused it. 3, how have you failed to resolve this? Again, dissociated, they should be looking at themselves, trying to resolve it. But with that downturn command tone at the end of the sentence, which should be a question, how have you failed to resolve this? Number 4, how can you overcome the solution to your problem? This blows out the boundaries of the problem because they have to think about how they've overcome the solution already. Again, that heavy NLP language is pretty powerful to the unconscious mind. If I have overcome the solution, I'm 5 steps past the solution looking back on it now. How can you overcome the solution to your problem? Let them think through that. Then we flip. Number 5. What would you like to change? You like to change. 6. We start to link to these resources here. When will you stop it from being a limitation? How many ways do you know you have solved this? I know you are changing and see things differently. That's it. Let the person contemplate inside the answers to all these. And you'll see that a natural reframing has to happen to contemplate these questions. Now, we're not saying that this would be appropriate in all therapy situations or normal day conversations, but that's a great alternative to some of that quantum linguistic patterns. We'll learn a lot more of that in the Master Prac. And from now on, as we're using reframing with ourselves and our life in one-on-one coaching or therapy sessions, we can see that by using language patterns like this, we can quickly separate that intention from the behavior. When we're in the behavior, many times we have a lot of emotions tied to that, and it's hard to see any kind of other alternatives or resources that may be right there. So if we can separate that initial intention that began the behavior, many times we can get right back to that same intention and create a different behavior. Simply by reframing internally, giving some different meaning to our current behavior, and letting us personally off the hook from the emotions, or taking that same behavior and putting it in a whole different context and realizing that I'm doing perfect right now. I'm doing great. It's just not the appropriate situation to do this great in. I could just move that same behavior into a different context, and I'm doing great. Reframing is really powerful. It's some initial techniques that we can use during our therapy sessions or coaching sessions, but in everyday life. Now, do you see how maybe in the future you could use this for sales reframing, for people to come see you personally for a coaching session, or for yourself if you think, if you're at the store. One example maybe looking at that pair of pants or that dress that you really love, but you pick up that price tag and think to yourself, I can't afford this. What if you just reframed it into, how can I afford this? Think about those other choices that start to come up in the brain. How can I afford this? What if I were to move money over here or work a little bit over here or get creative and trust the universe to supply me with the income that I can't afford this? I can afford this now. The power of reframing. So that about wraps up our session number 11 here. Turning negatives into positives. Context reframing, meaning reframing, using reframing in real day life, and the classic six-step reframe. So coming up in our session number 12, we'll be working with the parts integration eliminating internal conflict, fears and phobias. VK dissociation, powerful technique. Parts integration. And we look forward to that for some more tools in the toolbox. That's coming up. And stay tuned.